Hello and welcome to All Indians Matter. I'm Ashraf Engineer. For almost 2 years now, the Great Resignation has been the buzzword in corporate India. The term refers to the phenomenon of large numbers of employees quitting their jobs, choosing to prioritize themselves, their passions, or simply dumping the traditional definition of achievement for whatever counts as happiness for them. It was sparked by the COVID 19 pandemic but has continued and seems likely to last a while. The Great X, a recent study by recruitment consultancy Michael Page, said that 86% of employees plan to resign this year, with 61% willing to accept a lower salary or forego a pay rise and or a promotion for better work-life balance, overall well-being and happiness. This trend, the report says, is likely to continue across industries, seniority and age groups. What does this mean for industry and what are the mindset changes we're seeing in talent?
All Indians matter.
We have on the show S. Venkatesh, a human resources leader with more than 35 years of experience. He is among India's senior most and longest serving HR heads for diversified conglomerates. He is president, Group HR for RPG Enterprises, a $4 billion diversified conglomerate. He is responsible for a multicultural workforce that is 30,000 strong and spread across various geographies. For more than 22 years, he has led HR operations for global and Indian companies and has founded Swanishtha, a strategic HR advisory firm. An alumnus of the Tata Institute for Social Sciences, Venki, as he is known, is a sought-after speaker at various events and writes regularly in the media on HR issues. Welcome, Venki.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ashraf. Pleasure to be here.
Venki, what happened during the lockdowns that led to the Great Resignation? What snapped?
I think what has happened is simultaneously two kinds of events, Ashraf. One is, I think people spent 2 years in isolation. And I think that gave a lot of time for people to think through what they want to do in life. A lot of people took philosophical life decisions, not just career decisions. And when the world opened up, I think we also saw an uptick in terms of demand, particularly in technology, in IT services, products, and of course the startup world. Since then, it has a little bit slowed down. I think if you've been reading the, Economic Times and all the other leading newspapers, I think IT industry margins are under stress, so it's kind of slowed down. But we are talking about things which happened about 4 to 5 months back. It was actually a boom period. And I think a lot of people were ready to make a change. And it coincided with lots of opportunities being available. And there were some people who wanted to pause in their lives. And I think some of them took pretty idealistic decisions. A lot of people had loans, EMIs to pay, and so on and so forth. But I think people got a little deeper in terms of their, life exploration, life expectation during the pandemic. For some people, it snapped. I think for some people, it was boredom. And for some people, it was genuinely wanting to move out and explore new opportunities. I think it didn't snap for everybody. For some people, it was a seamless move, is what I think.
It's interesting also because we're seeing the flight of talent across the hierarchy. It's not just the junior levels or the mid levels or the senior levels, isn't it?
I think it's right. I think the pandemic affected everybody equally. And in fact, I remember the early part of the pandemic, the senior management or the leadership at that level was under maximum stress. I remember speaking to a couple of CEO friends of mine who said, listen, Venki, I think it's going to be a long, dark tunnel. We don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And they said, listen, we don't want to be known as failures at the end of our careers. So I think we made enough money to cover our expenses and we want to hang up our boots. Some people couldn't manage the first 2 to 3 quarters of bad performance and I think had to probably pay the price of losing their jobs. So this also happened to some people. And again, for some people, it was, an exploration of what they want to do. Do they want to go through a crisis like this again? Is the stress worth it? And therefore, senior talent as well as people, young professionals were equally affected, though I think the reactions were very different, right? And some reacted with pragmatism, some of the senior leaders, and some of the younger professionals said, listen, I think this is something we want to take it in our stride. It doesn't matter even if you're out of a job for 6 months. I think my generation, the thought of quitting without a job was anathema.
Yeah.
I don't think, the young professionals really care about that. All they care is next few months, how do we kind of reorganize our life? So
Venki, the top reasons cited for the resignations are career progression, change of career role or industry, unhappiness with salary, unhappiness with the strategy or direction of the company. What's been your experience?
I think a lot of people were unhappy about how their organizations treated them or panicked or did knee jerk reactions. And I think it stayed with them and they took a call as soon as they could to kind of move on. There were some others who found that they were not enjoying what they were doing. And I think the pandemic made it worse, right? I mean, you're sitting in isolation doing Zoom calls, and then it hits you that, frankly, you're being, not of great consequence to the organization or to your own family. I think the realization happened that, listen, we've been neglecting our families, we've been neglecting our loved ones in this mad rush. I think some people genuinely wanted a good break so that they could break out of the monotony of their existing jobs. And I saw a lot of young professionals catching up with their batchmates. I, for example, spoke to somebody who said, Venki, listen, I mean, we have a WhatsApp group of all our B school batchmates. And, people told me, listen, are you still working in this company for more than 5 years? Something's wrong with you. You will become unemployable. And therefore, why don't you move on? And therefore, that set off a panic reaction in me. So that's another set of people who moved on. For a lot of other people, it was FOMO, fear of missing out on opportunities in the market. And for some people, it was sheer boredom, right? Coming back after 2.5 years, traveling in the commute and going back to the same brick and mortar office was something which kind of put them off, and they at least wanted to go back, even if it was physically, to a new place. I think different strokes for different folks happen, Ashraf. But I think, honestly, now it is a little bit settling down. And people have found, their level of comfort in their existing organizations, either which allows them full work from home or hybrid. And those who have resigned themselves to coming back to work predominantly on all days. And that is so common now in the financial services industry. Financial services, by the way, never really fully shut down, as you know. Banks were operating, insurance companies were operating. So when things opened up, they insisted that employees come back 100% to work. There are some people who decided not to come back to those companies also. But some people who've been all their lives in the financial services industry had no choice but to kind of come back. So I think very, very different drivers for different people and different reactions, which kind of drove people to take their individual decisions.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. That's what I have also observed around me. But let's shift focus from employee to the corporate side for a second. What does the Great Resignation mean for India Inc.? Has that, for instance, meant a raising of the talent budgets?
Yes, it has. I mean, the kind of mad rush we saw a few months back did put a lot of pressure on salaries, particularly when people went to startups. I heard people say, listen, they're giving me an SVP position. I'm currently a general manager, so I'm actually taking a double jump, or I'm getting a 40-50% increase in salary. So there was this phase in which, there was this mad rush to also match salaries, but it's not sustainable, Ashraf. I think, if your cost structure doesn't allow you, like a startup which has got PE funding, I mean, they don't have to make profits for a few years. But, established corporates like ours, I mean, we got to work within a cost structure. So it was just not possible to match that. I mean, companies would do whatever is possible. And frankly, there would have been cases where they have been short-sighted and they have not corrected somebody's salary for long. But yes, overall, it did put overall pressure on budgets. It put pressure on introspecting as to what you're doing with your internal top talent. If somebody in the market finds them great, what are you doing with them? I mean, you just can't call them high pot, top talent, whatever fancy, nomenclatures we have for people within the company. And then you're not doing anything for them. And then they are finding smaller companies, particularly startups, or I would say conglomerates which are not, which were not earlier professional or professionalized, which are embarking on that journey. We're very happy to pick up good quality talent from companies which are managed well, have good governance. So they were ready to throw a price on the table for getting that kind of talent. So yes, the fact is, yes, budgets have been breached, and I think water will find its own level. You cannot kind of indefinitely keep this kind of pressure on in terms of salaries. It's just not going to be possible. But for your top talent, you do need to pay aggressively because the market has moved up. That's inevitable.
And what churn has this sparked in the talent market? What I mean by that is when people see their colleagues resigning in such large numbers, it gets them thinking
Yeah.
too, doesn't it?
So I think the churn particularly is in the fairly upwardly mobile and restless kind of population, which not surprisingly happens to be the most talented of your people. There is a talent pool which is a steady talent pool, which what we call as solid pillars or solid citizens who kind of love your company, love the culture, love the stability of working in one particular company for a long time. And then there is another restless set of people who are also highly talented who want to move on. I think the attrition in that population went up. And it is not just people who went to private equity funded firms, startups, where there's a tantalizing salary or a designation on offer. But we found even people moving from old economy to old economy, brick and mortar to brick and mortar. And like I said, that if you're a big fish, it's okay. But if you're a small fish in a big pond, then you get the opportunity to become a big fish in a small pond and, demand and get your pound of flesh. So the attrition did shoot up during that period. I think IT, we also have an IT company in our group called Zensar Technologies. I think IT, if you saw that, they saw the upward of 20% attrition numbers, which hit everybody equally. It was merciless, and all the companies, including from the biggest TCS to the smallest mid-tier companies, were affected by it. Again, that has stabilized into the early 20s, but we haven't still come back to the pre-explosion level of retention or attrition. It's still pretty much simmering on the surface.
And are many of those who quit turning into entrepreneurs? If yes, what lessons do you draw from that as an HR leader?
Not too many people are turning entrepreneurs. People are going and working for startups. People are going and working for other companies. There's a set of people who wanted to emigrate overseas. There's the people who want to go to Canada or UK or the US. We didn't see too many people becoming entrepreneurs. There are very few. What we did in RPG in the past is we have a fund called the RPG Ventures, and we opened up. If you remember the last time the current unicorns were all born, which is about 5-6 years back, we also had a little bit of stress in the system that a lot of our people, young talent, wanted to move out. What we quickly did is we asked people to come with their ideas. And this was an intrapreneurship program. And we funded a few of our people to kind of stay on and get funded by RPG Ventures. Out of that was born one very interesting company called seniority.in, which makes products for the geriatric population of our country. So to come back to your question, no. And if companies are wanting to retain that kind of talent, I think they'll have to do what we did some years back. And we're still open to doing it. That you allow them to kind of explore their entrepreneurial nature within a slightly more predictable kind of an environment. They will never be like a full-fledged RPG employee, but there will be a transition period when they can go into a startup, and from there, they can be launched. And by then we will, give them some supporting salary, some ESOPs and all of that. So that model worked very well for us. And I think a few other conglomerates started that practice, and we want to continue to use them. As we speak, I can't name the company, but in one of our group companies, we are spawning a subsidiary, a complete startup which will have its existence based on a technology platform, but it will be in an adjacent space to one of our group companies, where some of our internal employees are moving in there, and they will be working as entrepreneurs. I think you've got to do that. I mean, you can't expect some of those people with that appetite to stay on in these large, clunky organizations where they see many levels and the bureaucracy of growth and decision making and all of that. So you've got to get the combo right.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said all this because my next question was going to be that how is all this changing HR? I mean, is there a greater emphasis, for example, on employee engagement? And as a add-on question, with all this churn, it must mean a lot more pressure on HR folks, isn't it?
I think the pressure really significantly went up, Ashraf, during the start of the pandemic. There was not a day I remember that we didn't have pressure to, cut jobs or cut salaries or benefits and whatever. But I must tell you that we were probably one of the few companies which didn't give in to those knee-jerk reactions. And we continued to pay salaries. We never, let go of people. All the benefits were intact. In fact, 6 months into the pandemic, we actually started doing even a small midterm increase in salaries and all of that. But when the world opened up, the pressure was actually the future of work, right? The big debate about work from office and work from home. I think we found a level, we were pretty much sorted. In August 2020, when we were at the peak of the pandemic, we launched a permanent post-pandemic work from home policy for RPGs, which continues even today. A lot of companies were dithering at that time. We were probably the world's first conglomerate, and I say this, I'm not saying this by mistake, the world's first conglomerate to have a post-pandemic perpetual remote working policy. So to some extent, we've lessened the pressure on ourselves. We are pretty clear about who will work from home, who will not work from home, rest of the people, 50%. And we've allowed work from home even for manufacturing folks. If you're in a plant and you're not on the shop floor, you're, let's say, in a support function like quality, HR, finance, purchasing, even you can do this. So we kind of demolished a big divide which was there saying only office folks get this privilege and manufacturing people are at a disadvantage. The pressure then again happened when the boom happened and the Great Resignation happened. And one of the things we've done, we don't do a hard sell of it, but what we've done is we've got a value proposition articulated for our employees. We say, fine, we appreciate you going to a company at 40% increased salary, but are you sure that you have longevity there? So we kind of prepared a kind of a talent retention conversation aid memoir, which spoke about things which are currently available to you in RPG. You may have missed or you may have taken this for granted because, a new company may not have all this institutional support. For example, you could go and do a higher education qualification with us. You can go on a sabbatical. You can do flexi work. For young mothers, we have a very liberal policy. Now, you can't expect all of that in a frenetically growing startup. They need all hands on deck. They're not going to let you do all of this. They're not going to invest in your learning and development budget for the next 2 years and not expect an ROI. So a lot of people heard this and some of them still decided to go. But we have, interestingly, Ashraf, a lot of people who want to come back. I always say it's okay. There will be people who will leave you, but are we still going to be a talent magnet? And we have a very liberal boomerang policy. You know what's a boomerang, right? It's a welcome back home policy, which we practiced over the years. A lot of our competition did it or does it grudgingly today because they have no choice in this tight labor market. But we've always had a liberal policy. We don't, hold anything against anybody who's decided to move on. Large number of people have come back. In fact, in my own team, there was a young professional who went to one of the large consulting companies, didn't like the culture, reached out to me saying, Venki, listen, I don't think I can work in this place. Great brand, right? And I always say this, and in my writings, I'm pretty strong about this. A good product brand or a corporate brand is not necessarily a great place for you to work, right? Some of these brands are good for the product, but not necessarily for you to be an employee. So there is pressure. The pressure is not letting off. But as long as you have a authentic value proposition, I think you'll have to kind of constantly tell people what they will miss out if they walk out. And like I said, if you have a good employer brand, you'll continue to attract people. For example, we are now going to our campuses with a very different, renewed value proposition. 3 years back, we had people who said, can I become the CEO of the company in 5 years' time? Or can I become the strategy expert for your company? So now we are telling people, listen, We want you to come in and work in the trenches. You've got to understand the business of the company. You've got to earn your cudgels and come to the corporate office to be in a strategy role or a whatever, strategic direction giving role. If you haven't done operations, you can't come and do this. And some people are saying, no, we don't want to do that. We want to become CEO in 3 years, or we want to start giving gyan on strategy in 2 years. Then we are saying, fine. I mean, I don't think our paths can cross then. We are pretty chilled about it. We are not getting emotional about it. And we are choosing the right kind of people who will be our future leaders, who will fit into our culture. And if we have to therefore hire a lesser number of people, it's okay with us.
Sure.
We are not in this numbers game to go to, B schools and hire so many people.
Sure. But what about at an industry level? I mean, how is all of this affecting the HR function across industries, across brands? Are they focusing more, for example, on employee engagement?
See, employee engagement is a given. I mean, you have to do it.
That's just an illustrative thing. I mean, my question really is, how is the HR function changing because of the Great Resignation?
Okay, I'll tell you where it's changing the most, and that's something we have done reasonably well over the years, is focusing on your existing internal talent. And a lot of time, what we do is we take the people who are with us for granted, and we get deluded or whatever, mesmerized by the so-called star talent who are outside your company. And whoever comes in takes 6 months to even understand the culture and start contributing. So hitting the ground running is the biggest, the statement which I don't believe in at all, because nobody hits the ground running. Even if you are a CEO, you've been a veteran of 20, 25 years, you take time to understand the company you're joining. What I think companies are doing across, and I'm hearing so many of my colleagues in the fraternity say is, listen, if a person internally is 70% ready for the next role, we're taking a punt on him or her, rather than waiting for that mythical creature to come in from outside and work magic. I think we've always believed in that principle, and we are getting even stronger. And I'm constantly talking to my business colleagues and telling them, listen, I know you're critical about the person who's with you, and you say that he or she has to do better in these things. But so is the person coming from outside. You're not going to get somebody who's perfect for you. I think that big shift has happened. And in the past, people used to see people not so competent come in and take their position that they were vying for or come on top of them as their bosses. That used to also drive a lot of people outside the company. I mean, I think we've all in our personal lives, Ashraf, seen sometimes people coming on top of us who we think we don't respect enough because they're not good enough to be our bosses, right? It happens all the time. And the industry is now moving towards looking at internal, can you please dust off the dirt of the internal jewels and kind of make them sparkle again, is really the approach that people are working on.
There is also a need to upskill or reskill employees for a new age of business. So that must also be an additional pressure on HR professionals, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think where we are seeing a lot of that happening is increasing the digital quotient of our people. See, today digital is not only for tech companies, right? I mean, a brick and mortar company is trying to do things the quote unquote smart way, and that's not just a buzzword. We started our digital journey about 6 years back. We went and hired chief digital officers. Because at that time, I remember somebody telling me, but we have a IT head, we have a CIO. Why do we need a CTO? The whole orientation is different. With all due respects to the CIOs, they are managing IT systems, but they're not fundamentally changing the way you deliver a product or a process digital. So there, we are working on a lot of things. In each company, we have a digital organization. And every employee is also undergoing a basic digital awareness program and is able to kind of do whatever they're doing in a better way digitally. So other than the technology and the systems and whatever that you buy from all the vendors, I think just increasing the digital quotient of our people itself is a big task for us. And this is happening also in HR. I have a very large HR digital team. We are delivering, for example, we have a continuous performance management system called Dialogue 365, which is just changing the nature of conversations, right? In the past, we used to have a mid-year appraisal or a final appraisal, But today the conversation is online. It is like what you're doing in a Facebook posting. And the technology makes it so nice, the experience, that I don't have to wait for 6 months to give a feedback to my team member, good or bad, right? Both compliments. Indians are generally stingy with praise, and it gets stingier because they do it only once in 6 months, right? And equally, there is this whole recency effect, right? That if I've done well for 5.5 months, but the 6th month I screw up badly, my boss remembers only that, and kind of it comes back to haunt me. So we are trying to avoid all of that. I'm just giving that as an example. But enhancing the digital quotient to me, see, everything else is already taught in college. And of course, helping people to manage in a multicultural world, we are trying to make our organization far more diverse. We are trying to tell them how to ensure that we as an organization have zero tolerance towards harassment. And this is not just sexual harassment, right? It goes beyond that. We have a strong LGBTQ plus policy in the group, one of the first Indian conglomerates to have it. And how do you stop any harassment of any kind, right? Whether it's against gender, sexual harassment, whether it is sexual orientation, race, caste, community, religion, geographical origin, because we are now present in more than 100 countries. So we can't no longer behave, and we've never done that, but I'm saying any company no longer can behave like a desi company which is just running operations in the US or UK. I think a lot of Indian conglomerates still have to make the transition. As a lot of Western countries still have to make the transition, right? A lot of them come into India and still behave as if they're in Belgium or France or UK. So I think, it's not just a problem that India faces.
Yeah.
So a lot of work happening on all these fronts, Ashraf, to take the level up of both managers and employees.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, what you're talking about, this whole awareness building and capability building is also happening at the leadership level.
In fact, I'm going to take you up on the leadership bit in just a second. But before we go there, and you've addressed the next question at your company level, but I wanted to address this at a wider, more industry level. There has been great debate on models of work. So work from home, work from office, hybrid, etc. So all this would be something that companies would be grappling with. What do you think will be the model we will eventually settle on, or is it different models for different industries?
Well, there will be, I think overall, we will never go back to the old ways of working. I'm very convinced about that. Anybody who tries to push their company and their employees towards that is doomed to see people leaving, if not today, later on. There is a mindset in certain, particularly leadership folks, of wanting everybody to work the way they like to work. Right? I like to come in the morning at 9 o'clock, have a cup of coffee served to me. And I like to stay here till 8:39 in the evening. And I like to see all my team members hanging around, and they can't leave the office before I leave. I think that mindset is just waiting to cause problems. If not today, later. The people who will put up with it are people either who want to be clones of you, which is not a great idea to kind of create in any organization, or people who don't have a choice. The moment they get a choice, they will do it. I think the world has seen the value of remote working. We saw that productivity never got affected. And again, people were saying, result in productivity, people are at home, are they really working? We never saw any such. We never monitored anybody. In fact, we saw the opposite problems sometimes. Some people complained that, working hours never seem to stop, and work and life is blurring, and we saw longer hours. I think the concept of working from home, at least some part of the month, is here to stay. Okay? And I think it's eminently possible for every company to offer that. Now, what is the proportion? I can't prescribe, right? I mean, whether it should be 50%, whether it should be 20%, I think it's about the business that you are in. I think there are certain companies where you can actually be at home 80% of the time. And there are certain companies where it is reversed. What we did, Ashraf, and I think, unfortunately, I'll still have to delve into the company example. Because we came out with 4 categories of people. One category who can be 100% work from home forever. And we went and hired 1,000 people in the country. particularly in IT, who pass out from engineering college, work from home, and they will retire from home. I'm being a little dramatic, but they never have to come to the older hubs of Bangalore, Pune, Hyderabad, where we have the technology campuses of Zensa. There's a second set of people who have to be always at work physically. Who are these folks? Shop floor employees, security supervisors, admin people. You can't have a security supervisor working from home, right? I mean, that's a ridiculous concept. Or a shop floor person who's running a machine has to be. The rest of us can all be in a hybrid work environment. I think the world will settle down to these three categories. The proportion of these three categories will depend on your industry. Who are you servicing? Do you need to be in front of the customer? Do you need to be, coming at least 2 days a week or 3 days a week or 4 days a week? I think people want some flexibility. To deny it 100%, you're just going to see flight of people. I mean, I'm seeing there's a lot of debate. I won't take the names in Wall Street as well. There's a very large financial services company. The chairman keeps saying, if you can go and have dinner in a Manhattan restaurant, you're jolly well come to work tomorrow and work. Equally, there is a competitor of theirs who's saying, listen, guys, chill. I don't want you more than 2 days in a week. The other companies saw a flight of capital going there. So I think the people who display sensitivity, flexibility, and some reality orientation will gain in the end. Those who want to stick to their old ways, I think they will see a flight. There are people are taking hard decisions, right? I know some people who don't want to come back from remote locations. They've gone to Goa. Goa is not remote, but what I'm saying is it's not your typical 7-city corporate hub, right? Like Bangalore, Chennai, or Mumbai, Delhi, whatever. People have gone to Bareilly. People have gone to Bhubaneswar. I know somebody who's gone to Shimla who doesn't want to come back. And they told me, Venki, even if I get something which pays me 30% less, I'm going to have a better quality of life. I'm breathing in cleaner air. I'm working from home. And, my work fits in perfectly well. So you will lose talent. You will lose talent. I met a girl in my wife's native village in Karnataka. She works for a Japanese corporation, a technology Japanese corporation. And she's been there, not just in the pandemic, but 11 months of the year she's working from there. Literally a village. She's got a village home, nice home, with 2 cows tied at the outside. And she's saying, I'll never leave this and go back to Bangalore.
Yeah, I think we are seeing a lot of that sort of sentiment. But let me come back to that leadership bit that you spoke about earlier. There's a huge spotlight on corporate leadership, and the example that you gave of the CEO in Wall Street saying that if you can go to a Manhattan restaurant, you can come to work. I know who you're talking about, but since you didn't want to take the name, even I won't. But I think has the Great Resignation forced a change in leadership styles, or at least a lot of introspection?
Yes, it has led people to think about, there is going to be a set of few companies which will say, listen, this is really the way we work. If you're interested, you continue, or, till the promoter or the CEO has a very clear one single way of working. There's no flexibility around it. There will be those kind of companies. But increasingly, they will be talent repellents. They will not be talent magnets. And they will lose good talent to companies which show flexibility. So I think people are realizing that. Some people are quick to change. Some people are slow to change. They're hoping that India's teeming millions will always be available to them. And this is a myth which we saw for many years, that we have 1.3 or 1.4 billion, whatever is the last count. But it's a pretty small pool of people who are really employable. And if you start putting in all these policies which don't appeal to the current, not just the current generation, I know people who are 50 plus who want this flexibility. They will leave you sooner than later. So there is a lot of introspection. There is a lot of people. Some people are clenching their teeth and want to change their style. Some are doing it far more naturally. But yes, and even if, let's say, 50% of the companies change, you will see a dramatic change in the corporate India, kind of landscape. And I think it's a good thing. I mean, as a culture, we are fairly regimented, right? I mean, our families, our social structures are regimented. People don't want to work in a company also which is regimented. I think they will want to see flexibility. And why not? If you offer that to them and they enjoy a good life, quality of life and work-life balance, and they're still delivering, at the end of the day, performance is paramount, right? You're not going to be compromising on that. Why not?
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with you on that. Venki, more than 60% of India is age 30 or less. How are their aspirations, needs, expectations different from that of the earlier generation of employees?
That's a tough question. And some time back I wrote an article on this, examining the lay of the land. I mean, it's called Talent, the Ultimate Arsenal. And I compared about, India is also an important country and there is a arms race. People are building nukes. But we have the biggest arsenal in the world, which is our talent, right? But the problem is the mix is very, very complicated. 94 or 95% is unorganized. 5% is organized to have access to trade unions and labor rights and all of that. Then, of course, there is this big rural and urban divide. And our villages, with all our lip service we, give to villages and rural India, they still haven't developed to the extent that people do not want to leave villages. Everybody wants to come to a bigger town and then finally a big city. So how do we find jobs for all these people? I think, manufacturing is one big employment source, but we haven't seen the kind of spread of manufacturing hubs across the country. The other place where, you could have a lot of employment is small retail. I don't mean big retail like, the big stores, chains and whatever, but even small retail. I mean, you go into a small village Bata showroom. I mean, the people who are there are not really trained to explain the quality of the footwear, or they don't know how to speak to a customer. So there's a lot that you can do and try to disaggregate the numbers which are flocking into the cities. At a larger level, I think the psychographic profile of the Indian worker has dramatically changed. My generation wanted to work and work for a lifetime, right? Today's generation may not want to work for a lifetime. Now you might say, that's all idealistic and how do you retire at 40 or 45 or even 50? Because our needs are not coming down. But right now, people want to do that. They don't want to be on a treadmill all their lives. And I think people are willing to take a small compromise. And there are various other avenues for finding employment. For example, even look at something like social media. The whole income that you get from being a YouTuber was missing, right? The whole income that you get from being on TikTok, for example, was missing. A lot of people are seeing those as, so the traditional avenues of employment, or being in a company and working from 9 to 5 till you're 58 or something, is going to disappear. But it's not a simple solution. It's pretty complex. How many people can be self-employed and be able to support themselves and have a great lifestyle? Very difficult to say, right? I mean, there was some article I read in Bloomberg which spoke about this generation of Americans are never going to be able to earn as much to be able to afford the lifestyle of their parents. They're not going to be able to buy a car or a house at the age at which their parents bought those assets. And also many of them, which is unusual for a Western country, are still living with their parents. So they have the comfort, the umbrella, the shield, or whatever you want to call the financial security of working and then living with your parents. We are seeing a lot of that in urban India also. Okay, because you still have a family system and people are living together, pooling in their resources. But what happens when people, spread out? So I don't have a simple or a simplistic solution to that. But generally, I think people are wanting balance in their lives. People want time for music, for entertainment, for fitness. People don't want to work, burn the midnight oil. People are demanding, we are saying, in all companies, including ours, people wanting that balance. They're saying, fine, it's okay. There are some urgent projects which require you to work sometimes late, but don't make it a habit. And we are sensitive to that. We've actually introduced a chief fitness officer in our company. We've given free mental health, mental wellness support from a professional company to all our employees and their families. Yeah, so the value systems, right, of the current gen, very, very different vis-a-vis the work, right? And I'm not saying anything negative or positive vis-a-vis any of these populations. I think the young gen works equally hard, equally focused about quality, far more kind of aware about what they're doing in the company, the effect on the environment. Ethics and governance is uppermost in their minds. They do not want to work for a company which is not ethical. They do not want to associate themselves with a company which is not up there in terms of value systems. I think these are all good things, right? I think people are just not wanting to get money out of any company which does not do right things for society and community. I think it's a nice change which has happened. It will put pressure. There will be greater pressure on companies that if you want to attract the right kind of talent, you have to be perceived as a good company. People are not just interested in going and working for any company which throws money and says, come and work. So I think that's the big shift which has happened in the last, I would say, almost 10, 15 years.
So, Venki, which brings me to the question I ask all my guests at the end of the show. Why do you do this work?
So listen, I think, a long time back, I realized that what I do, I'm speaking about my life as an HR professional, you have the opportunity to do something good every day. It could be that you've just done away with with a roadblock or a bureaucratic process, or you've really genuinely done something significantly large. So the ability to impact people, and I don't say this with any amount of immodesty, in our own small ways, you can actually do a lot of change. And at the end of the day, and I'm not saying this because I'm an HR professional, but I think what really matters is talent and people. Everything else can be bought, Ashraf. In a country like ours, and we also saw that over the years with scams and all of that, there's so much bad money in the market. Anybody can put up a plant or buy a company or buy machinery or buy digital equipment or whatever. But to build culture and talent, it takes decades. So why I do this job is because of all of that. And I think in a way, this profession that I do, if you're not passionate about doing something good, and in the process also put up with some amount of unpleasantness and resistance, whatever, resistance with many things, right? It's not an easy path. And I'm not saying this like a martyr or something. We are all enjoying ourselves. We are being paid well. It's a good life. I think we are lucky that, we are the post-liberalization generation and we got good jobs and, we've created material wealth for ourselves. But I'm an old-fashioned HR guy, Ashraf. I believe in this whole people championship model. At the end of the day, my constituency, my customers are my people and my employees. I do work for the business and I have a very pragmatic sense of how the business and the people interest can be balanced. But at the end of the day, I think, my 35-year journey is really about what can you do to make things better for our people. If I don't walk in every morning with that query in mind, it's just yet another mechanical existence. That's all I can tell you.
Venki, thanks so much for putting the Great Resignation in perspective and also for detailing solutions and what lies ahead.
No, thanks, Shraf. I think I just spoke out of, recollecting what we did as a company and also I think what I think we need to do. Interesting times, and I think we've got clear solutions in our mind. I've got clear solutions in my mind. And it's something which, this is not going to go away in the next 6 months or 1 year. We live with this. Somebody told me that for you to be effective for the future, all leaders, including Indian leaders, have to be prepared for long periods of uncertainty and unpleasantness. I think we are gearing up for that. The world will become far more complex. But thank you very much. It was a pleasure and phenomenal questions that made me think as well. So thank you very much for being a great host as well.
Thank you all for listening. Please visit allindiansmatter.in, that's ALLINDIANSMATTER.in for more columns and audio podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Ashraf Engineer, that's ASHRAFENGINER, and All Indians Count, that's ALLINDIANSCOUNT. Search for the All Indians Matter page on Facebook. On Instagram, the handle is All Indians Matter. Email me at editor@allindiansmatter.in. Catch you again soon.